Hey, Steve Moriarty, how you doing, buddy?
Have a little back pain this morning, but other than that, I'm fine.
Well, that's good. That's good. Did you hurt your back or something?
I broke it, yeah, in July.
Oh, wow.
I fell off a cliff in the Sierras when I was hiking and landed
Wow.
on and I broke four of my ribs, top ribs, in the
Oh my
back because they go
God.
around,
Right.
and I hurt my left lung with one of my ribs went through my lung. So so I was at the bottom of this ravine. It was like 105 degrees, and we had to go swimming because we had gone camping, and it was like 7 in the morning. It was already 85. We're like, fuck this, let's go camping, let's go for a swim.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Sierras, there's all these rivers that have rapids because back in the day, the 49ers used to use dynamite, and they blew up half of this Sierra range, and they left
Mm-hmm.
all these big gullies that water runs down now, and so there's big slabs of rock that kind of come down and in you know valleys where the water runs, and so the water was looking really nice, and hiked down, I don't know, half a mile down to the riverbed, and I was walking up the side of a steep flat large flat rock,
Mm-hmm.
and mist from the falling water had created algae on it, and so I started slipping, and I turned, and I looked over to my left, and there was like 420 somethings, like completely naked, sunbathing on this other rock, and I was like, "What? Where?" And then I fell over the side,
Oh
and
my
I landed
God.
back. It was probably only about 12 feet, but I landed on my scapula, and
Oh
as soon as
God.
I knew that something was broken, and like I was either going to die, or I was going to get airlifted out. And so I sat there, I lied there, couldn't get up for about an hour, and so I was baking in the sun, and people were like, do you need me to call 911 or something?" I'm like, "Yes." And
Oh
so
God.
somebody did, and four paramedics came down and tried to get me out. I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Can you do it?" "I'll try." So I managed to get myself on my feet and walked out. And one of the paramedics actually got heat stroke just getting me out. So they put me on the ambulance and sent me to the hospital, and I was there for a while
Wow.
here in Nevada
Wow.
hospital.
Were you hiking by yourself or did you have a hiking partner?
I was with a friend. It was her fucking idea to go down there anyway. So, but yeah, people. It's really funny because you can really tell who in a situation like that, like who's really adept at dealing with tricky situations and who's just not. And it's not
Right.
everybody. And so next time I think I will be camping with people that are a little more experienced in crisis resolution and
Yeah, no shit, man.
management because I could have used a little help. But I'm almost better now, but I have a lot. I will have a lot of back pain probably for a long time.
Oh man, that's horrible. That's horrible. Like, yeah, there are two things you don't fuck with: teeth and your back,
Your
right?
back, yeah,
Because you don't realize how much you use either of those two things until you can't.
yeah, and the back you have to. I'm doing physical therapy, and you have to engage your other muscles, right? You have to engage your stomach and your Pilates muscles,
Right.
as my there's as your pilot's muscles. Um, but that so you work on the core strength, and then that hopefully takes the pressure off your back and improves your posture and so forth. But in my case, my posture is still really bad, and my back still hurts. But I should be
Oh,
exercising more. But it hurts.
yeah, no shit, man. I mean, I have the worst posture in the world. Like,
Well, it's fine
it's,
for
yeah, maybe. I mean, but it's eventually gonna, kick me in the ass. So,
yeah,
you know,
Jack and
it, it's
uh,
it's been 50
this
years so far, and I'm, still walking. So there's that.
right, and that life expectancy wasn't 50 until like 1842 or something.
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah,
Um. So, well, first of all, I hope I hope your back gets better in the short term here.
it's okay.
Um. Yeah, that's good. That's good. You look very comfortable. So, like I can't sit that way because I have to like sit in this chair. I'm like that's my preferred position. Kind of like one leg crossed over the other and just kicked back.
The comfort is the fentanyl.
Oh, there you
I'm just
go. There you
just,
go.
just kidding. Just kidding. No drugs.
Um. fentanyl. Um, I'm sure we'll talk about drugs at some point through this whole thing, but maybe not right now. It's we're only 5 minutes in here, so
Oh,
it's
right.
that's like
5
maybe
minutes.
minute 45 or so. Like, oh yeah, no, it's starting to kick in. I'm
Yeah,
feeling okay.
it's already there.
Um, yeah, exactly. So okay, we went like almost 5.5 minutes, and I didn't even introduce who you are.
Oh,
Um, which is not uncommon for me. Like I tend to do shit like that. Um, so the majority of people would know you from the Gits, right? Um, you've done a lot of
mostly, yeah.
other things, but I mean, people, if they were looking and they would probably know you from the Gits. I'm going to assume, right?
In
Um,
Seattle, Seattle's kind of you guys are kind of in a bubble of your own there.
yes, there's no
It's, yeah,
doubt.
they believe that these like people they've heard their names in certain bands over the last 20 years are these certain like wealthy celebrities or something.
Right,
Um, and no one has really heard of many of the people that are held in high regard in Seattle
right.
in the press.
It's
But that's cool because you have your own little thing.
yeah. Well, yeah. Like last week, I had Gary Lee Conner from Screaming Trees on, and
Sure.
it was he's such a sweetheart of a guy. Anyway, so he's like, I don't know where people get the idea that we made money because like I ended up owing the IRS a bunch of money, and I I
No,
don't even I don't even know what they're talking about. They're just like, no, we're not like uber wealthy or anything. It's just selling records, and most people don't understand that. Like selling records doesn't mean shit, right?
yeah,
I
it
mean,
really does.
you have to have unless you have one of those like killer contracts, which so few people have. It you know, uh, if you're lucky, you're gonna make. I mean, super lucky, you'll make $1 an album split, 4 or 5 ways, plus the producers, plus what like. Yeah, okay, great. I mean, if you're lucky, that's what you make. Um, but I mean, it still must be fun though, right? I mean, like going and playing a gig in where Amsterdam, like we were talking about before, right, or wherever.
Yeah. Amsterdam was a good gig, except for in Amsterdam, people they're not very appreciative. They're very like reserved. I think it's because it's one of the most dense cities in the world. Everyone lives kind of on top of one another, and
Right.
they kind of learn to be aloof and to like not sort of communicate with outsiders. But I remember when we were playing, we would finish a song, and the the people in the audience would go, they'd snap their fingers and go, "Oi, oi!" I'm like, "What are they doing?" And later they were like, "Oh, that means they like you. That's the way they appreciate clapping." I'm like, "Oi!" Like, yeah, it's like they want a cigarette or something.
Right. But I mean, to be honest, that's not much different than Seattle was in the early 90s, right? I mean, Seattle always cracked me up because it was one of those cities where you'd go to a show, it didn't matter how full the show was, and people would just kind of like stand there and kind of like, bob their heads a little bit to the
Not
music.
at all.
I mean, there was always that group who were like, in a mosh pit or whatever, and whether it was appropriate for the show or not, there was always a mosh pit. Um, but the majority of people would stand there, and I was guilty of it too, like stand there with their hands across their like, yeah, man, this is cool, but not really interacting so much.
I think I did that too when I saw bands that were slow and boring. Like, but like we tended to play about twice the tempo of most Seattle bands at that time. Like
True.
we'd already been for 4 years when we arrived in the town, and so we knew we had a good set list, and our songs were really up tempo. I mean, we're
Hmm.
practically hardcore compared to the Screaming Trees
Right.
or Mudhoney. Like slow, Mudhoney's like considered punk in Seattle at that time, but like their stuff is so slow, it's so boring, And, I mean, I like it now, but uh, and I learned to appreciate things like guitar sounds and drum sounds because the music wasn't doing anything for me. So I'd have to find
Right.
something else. Oh, bass sound is really good with this band. And I mean, I booked clubs too, and I went through so many demo tapes. I'd have a bucket full of demo tapes, and every day I would go through about 10 or 12 and listen to them and try to find one that was worth booking. And I found one worth booking, and that was on a cassette, and it was a band called the Presidents of the United States.
Right.
America. And oh, maybe I'll give these guys a gig. They sound kind of good, kind of cool. So I had them opening for Babes in Toyland at the OK Hotel in 1991, and then they
I
just
love it.
like, and they forgot that I launched their career. So
Mm,
I wish they'd played a little faster. It would have been better.
yeah. But see, I mean that's the whole thing, right? So at that moment in time, and '91, I actually lived right around the corner from the OK Hotel. So I
Oh
was there a lot. Um, and it was that time where it didn't really matter what was playing. Like he would just
yeah,
show up, like, and most of the
great.
venues were that way. Same off ramp for certain. Like I was there every weekend. Didn't matter who was playing. Just always there.
Yeah,
Um, so I mean, I think there was a certain amount of magic happening, but it didn't seem like magic at the time. It was just like, I'm going to go see
yeah.
these random bands.
There were some very very good bands though. I mean, like the OK Hotel was practically like the all ages CBGBs of the West Coast. Like everybody
Hmm.
wanted to remember one. I mean, I booked it for about a year, 91 to 92, I think, because I thought the Gits weren't getting good shows. So I was like, I have to be proactive. And so I decided to try to book clubs and just book my own
Hmm.
band on the coast, right? Just guerrilla, just go for it.
That's brilliant.
And 1 week in the summer of 92, I think, I know MTV showed up. That was when MTV was sort of still on the rise. And they showed up to film whoever was there. Uh, and that sort of gave it national notoriety. But 1 week, I booked a band from San Francisco called Neurosis, and
Hmm.
JFA and Agent Orange was the next day, and then it was L7, Babes in Toyland, and 7 Year Bitch the next day, and then it was a band called not Government Issue, but uh, Government Cheese. No, um, anyway, they were on a major label. And it was like
Hmm.
Toad the Rocket after that, and then
I was
anyway, it
at
was
that
just
Toad the Wet Sprocket show, which was
yeah.
actually really
And then
fun. It was a lot
and
of
then
fun.
at the end of that week, they wanted me. There was the owner said, "Oh, we have a Sunday matinee." I'm like, "Fuck!" I just worked all week, man. I
Hmm.
did the door. I had to like run back and make sure no one got beat up on the stage and back and forth. And then that Sunday he's like, "Oh, we've got this band coming from Oakland." I'm like, "Man, I can't deal with it." It's like going to start at noon and they're going to play till 2. I'm like, okay. So I went down and I was supposed to do the door, do the sound, do security, and do the payout. And the band was Green Day. I'm
Right.
like,
I was gonna say that. I
why are
remember
people
that.
lining up? Why are people lining up around the block? I'm like, fuck. And so yeah, I had to
So
do it all.
funny.
They didn't even thank me.
I mean, that was part of the beauty of the OK Hotel. Like you never knew what you were going to end up with, right? And it was sometimes they'd have just some random band from. There was a band from Santa Fe. God, I can't think of their name to save my life, but I still have their 45 somewhere. Totally random. Like I mean, they didn't fit at all. They just were kind of like sandwiched in on this bill. Um, and I loved it. Like that was fun because it was music was a lot about discovery, right? And it wasn't just like, oh, you've got three bands that sound exactly the same, which is so fucking boring, man. Like, I mean, nobody wants to hear that.
And we went out of our way to book 3 or 4 bands that did not sound the same. That was my
Yeah.
thing. I wanted to like, I'd have the Black Cat Orchestra, which was like a oompa, sort of like a polka, like Eastern European band with cello and French horn and stuff. And then I would put them on with like um, uh, a thrash metal band and some other band just to break it up. And
Yeah.
that's what people expected, and that's what they liked.
Yeah.
And then they would start to share um, members. Like not every person that plays heavy metal just wants to play heavy metal. I mean, maybe they want to be in an pop band or
Yeah.
something. So
Absolutely,
they
man.
cover each other that way. But that was that was a pretty fantastic time. OK Hotel, I think, is real underappreciated for what it brought because it was a short time, but it was intense.
Very intense, man. Very intense. I did one show at the OK Hotel, and it wasn't music. It was trying to remember. It was probably about 92, 93, probably 93. And it was I forget what they called it. It was basically like an art show sort of thing, right? It was just this random whatever. And I had been doing stupid poetry slam stuff or whatever. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to do a poetry slam thing, but, I do write software. So I created, what did I call it? The ultimate the ultimate slam poetry machine or something stupid like that, right? Like, like you do when you're like 20, 21 years old.
Shit.
And it was a software program I had written that basically created random slam poetry, right? Yeah, no, it was so stupid. And I literally I had to take my, desktop down there, and I had it wrapped in like Christmas lights and whatnot. It was just, the whole thing was so silly. I mean, it was
You
so silly.
probably walked away with $1 billion in venture capital, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. Exactly.
It's been 2 years
Um,
later.
and it was all good until this one guy who came up, and I forget who he was. He was in one of the bands that played at OK all the time. And I'll think of it eventually. But and he's like, he played with it for a little while, and he's like, well, this isn't random. I was like, what do you mean? He was like, I keep getting the same thing over and over again. I was like, okay, game over, and I like unplugged the whole thing. I was like, fuck this. It's like the one guy who was a total like Luddite was like, dude, this isn't random. It's like, oh fuck, you know. So I felt really, really, really stupid. Um,
No.
but hey, it happens. It happens. So let's get back to the Gits a little bit, because obviously we're gonna talk about the Gits, right? Um, I I saw the Gits a bunch of times, like
Oh,
randomly, and I can't even tell you when and where. The only show I think I remember, and I'm saying I think because age adds to that that mystery. Um, I think it
bourbon.
was the yeah, and bourbon helps that too. I think it was the Gets, the Cows, and I want to say it was Whorehouse of Representatives, something like that. Anyway, but it was at the off ramp, I believe. It was something along those lines, but basically it was three female singers, right? Um, and that was amazing because there weren't that many females, in Seattle rock at all.
At all.
The only other one I can think of right now, and I'm going to talk about her a little bit too, is Carrie Ockery, right? I mean, like she was, yeah. I mean, basically, there were a handful, five or six, I would say.
Yeah,
Um,
it was really I mean, I was just looking back, comparing bands now that I see around the Bay Area and when I'm in Seattle, and it, it hasn't changed that much, but it has changed significantly. I mean, there are women playing music that are like
mhm,
burlesque act or something because there's four women playing music.
mhm,
I think too often, like Sub Pop maybe had one early on. Sub Pop had one band with female artists, and they were called Dickless, and it was like, let's
right.
make a joke out of it too. And it's like, come on, it was really
Yeah.
disrespectful.
No, I agree with that. I agree. And it's funny because Dickless actually was a pretty
They were
decent
good.
act.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I dated.
But what's that?
Oh, I dated the drummer for 3 years.
Nice.
2 or 3.
Nice. Huh. Yeah, I mean, but again, it's like with a name like that, it's like you're not going to go anywhere, right? I mean, like there's, I mean, you could. I guess it's possible.
Yeah,
Um,
you could be considered a novelty act.
right.
So I mean, and I think that Sub Pop had a real deficiency there in looking outside of like what exactly their core constituency bought. I mean, they offered to do a single for us at one point at the OK
Hmm.
Hotel. I was talking to one of the owners named Jonathan, and
Hmm.
he said, "Oh yeah, I would do a single with you guys, but like we're seriously going out of business. We haven't sold any records, and like my company is just about to go under." And I was
Right.
like, "Oh." And that was prior to Nirvana had just played the OK Hotel and was just about to go record Nevermind
Right.
in LA. They hadn't, if it weren't for Nevermind and Sub Pop having the points on the Nirvana records, they wouldn't be in existence. I
No,
doubt,
not at all. Not at all.
because they did more women in music.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that whole thing. I mean, we could probably talk about Sub Pop for a solid
Oh
hour.
yeah,
And I think I did with a couple of people that I've had on recently.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
they just, I don't know, fuck. I mean, they dropped the ball in such a giant way that it's so painful, especially in hindsight, to look at. Um, they could have done so much more. Actually, I had Michael Anderson from Blood Circus on, which Blood Circus is one of my favorite. I just loved them
Oh,
because they were so different than all the other bands.
oh, cool.
Um, and we were joking about that. Like, you know, there's a kind of apocryphal story that they're the worst selling band in Sub Pop history, right? And that's like kind of the joke.
Hmm.
And they weren't. They actually sold. I mean, they didn't sell great, but they were decent. Not the worst selling, but close to it. And it's like Sub Pop kind of used that as a means of kind of keeping them out of the spotlight, right? Because they propagated the story of, like, hey, this band didn't sell shit. Like, they're not worth anything. But,
Yeah,
you know,
it was just that put the business, their label, above the bands in every way. It was
yeah,
like it's all about not about the bands, and Motown ripped off its artists too. So it's
yeah.
like
Well,
what
it's an evil industry, man. I mean, it's a totally evil industry. Um,
there's some good ones though. I mean, on Kill Rock Stars, I have a lot of respect for what they've done,
hmm
and I've actually not heard any negative comments about them.
hmm
Uh, but I think the owner Slim probably maintained a particular level of respect by not trying to do too much or be too much.
right, right,
Just doing
which
it.
is important. You know, I think maybe with Sub Pop, and I promise we're going to move away from Sub Pop in just a minute. Um, but I think in their case, they didn't know what they wanted, right? I mean, they wanted to be two things at once, which is a small label that pushed bands that were nobody knew about, but they also wanted to be a major label. So they had this like this total like pulling both ends, in regards to what they would do. Um, and especially like if you look back at um, some of the like very few people know this, but Skinny Puppy actually recorded a track for Sub Pop, right? I mean, like they were all over the place, and I think that was the Sub Pop 100. It was like their first like compilation thing.
Mhm.
Um, and fucking Jesus and Mary Chain. I don't know all the details of this, but they actually did a song for Sub Pop as well. Like, so they were kind of all over the fucking place.
Fugazi and Elastica, and then they were like playing like a boutique label for other bands to launch them. Like, oh, look, they're
Right,
an indie band, so we're going to put out an indie single, but actually they've already signed their contract with us, so let's
right,
just pretend make them popular. But they arrive
exactly.
at now they're owned by a major label, and they're considered an indie label, and they have a store at the airport. So how could it
Which
be
is
any better?
fucking amazing. Like every time I walk past that, I'm just like, oh fuck, are you serious? Really? Like
And then spend an hour buying shit. That's the problem.
right.
Because no, the
I
people
mean,
that work there are really nice usually.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and they usually put out a good product. Like I mean, they don't tend to anyways. Skimp on packaging and whatnot. Like it's a decent product. Um, although I can't think of the last time I bought something off of Sub Pop. Probably about 25 years is my guess, maybe even 30. Um,
For 30 years, and then finally did. So it's either way, it's been
yeah.
weird. But right
Um,
now, we'll pat our heads and take a little break.
okay, sounds like a plan, dude.
Yeah.
Okay, quick pee break, and we're back here. Um, Steve, I want to talk a little bit about the Gets, specifically the tragedy that unfolded in 1993, um, and because that was a moment where I think Seattle really lost its innocence, right? Because it was a bunch of bands just kind of like playing around, and everybody was friends, and everything was fine, and it seemed like a really really safe city, right? And then suddenly it wasn't, you know.
Yeah. I think that's a bit of a misnomer there because I don't think it was a safe city before. I mean, we moved there in '89,
hmm
1989. I remember walking from Broadway, up Pine Street towards where I lived on 19th and Denny, and
hmm
it was dark. There was like empty, abandoned car dealerships. There were
hmm
hardly any streets. there were hustlers and like crack dealers on like at 12th and Pine and Pike, like on the corners, and then it sort of cleaned up a bit going into the early 90s, but not really. It was still like a lot of low rent apartments, and Capitol Hill was pretty dark and scary, as was around the market, around
Mm-hmm.
Third and Pine, where the strip clubs were,
Right.
and then in Belltown, you didn't really want to walk alone. So I think that evil was always there, but it was overlooked because everyone was together and they weren't seeing anything. They weren't noticing.
Right. I mean, plus we were young, right? So when you're young, like you don't fear, right? I mean, I had no fear when I was in my early 20s, like none.
Yeah, well, I
Um,
did. I mean, I grew up with gangs around and stuff, um, and I was always cognizant, and all of us in the Gits. I mean, Andy grew up in Brooklyn, and Matt in New Jersey, and Mia in Louisville, Kentucky, and like those aren't pleasant places.
right.
And so we were all kind of a bit wary all the time of our environment, and it kept
Hmm.
us out of trouble because we were hyper vigilant in that way. But I remember thinking, gosh, people really don't see, all the crap, the graft, and the evil that's around, and the darkness.
Now,
And
and
we
I
we
think,
came out in our music a bit, I think.
without a doubt, without a doubt. And I think, in hindsight, I see that, but I didn't see it then, right? I mean, everything seemed safe to me at that time, or at least surmountable, right? Like, I mean, even if, I lived in Belltown in 89, 90, whenever it was. And I was able to walk, literally, I could walk from downtown to my apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning and not see a soul, right? I mean,
Yeah,
there
and
was no one
not
around.
that's
Yeah.
not a situation if you really think
Yeah.
about it.
And I lived down on Western, right? So there was literally nothing on West. Oh my God, your cat is cute. Um,
Yeah, he'll be around.
that's cool. Hey, when I had Gary Lee Conner on, he had his dog make a guest cameo. So, why not?
Yeah,
It's all
can't.
good. Yeah, but there was, you're definitely right, but it seemed at least at the time that there was this weird innocence and it didn't matter, like
Yeah,
you could go anywhere you wanted, and there was no fear. And, I think like right around, where the comet is, that was kind of a delineation line, right? Like, I mean, going east of where the comet was, particularly like if you lived on 19th and Denny, that you started to get into a little weird zone, you know?
yeah. There was a
Um,
venue there. Um, there was a venue there on Madison, 20th and Madison, that I remember. Gross. Um, uh, that was I remember a drive by. There was a band playing, and I think it might have been Fugazi. It might have been another
mhm.
band from DC. Maybe it was Government Issue, but there was a drive by shooting, and everyone was in this little hall doing the show, and everyone had to hit the ground because someone had gone by and just popped a bunch of caps into the side of the gig. And
Yeah.
I remember hearing gunshots all night at 19th and Denny, and now that's like a Beverly Hills 91210 or something.
Right. I mean, I just saw a condo on, what was it, 22nd and Jackson, I think it was, that was selling for like $900,000. And it was like, who the fuck would want to live there, right?
Our
I-
rent was $580, I think, a month for
yeah.
4 bedrooms. So,
Oh yeah. No, I mean, and so it's funny. Like the gentrification is well, it's just a weird fucking thing to see.
it's a
You
weird
know,
thing.
like I don't know when the last time you were on Capitol Hill. I try not to go anymore because it's depressing. Um, but all of that grime. So I know I'm contradicting myself here, right? So it was safe, but it was also grimy. So I've got these weird mixed memories,
It
of
is.
that time.
It is a paradox, as they say.
Yeah, yeah, but anyway, now it's all just like these $1 million condos like everywhere.
And they turn over
It's
people are there 6 months and then they sell them, because they
yeah,
want to upscale or downscale or whatever they're doing.
yeah, it's crazy. Um, but okay, so at that time in 93, there there was that no man's land, like especially once you got above say like 15th, right? Um and yeah, it was a really, you're right, it was dark. I guess I didn't notice it at the time, or
Yeah.
again I was young and just like, oh well, fuck it, like I can do anything, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Um but what happened to me, it definitely changed all of that for a lot of people, you know
Yeah.
um and it's obviously an extreme tragedy, right? But there was some good, I think, that ended up coming out of it, and again, I'm not making light of anything. I'm just saying I think there was a little bit of good, because when the Home Alive stuff started, um it was sort of it was like, so people had gone through this, and they were really sad and afraid. Particularly women in Seattle were extraordinarily afraid. Right after that happened, and then when Home Alive began, there was sort of a weird like community. I'm not going to say it's a good thing, um, but it was sort of like a giant group hug, in Seattle, that happened. Um, and I I personally, I'll be perfectly blunt, I had never even thought that something like that could happen, right? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people in Seattle were that way too.
Yeah.
Um, but when people kind of came together and started supporting this, like, hey, well, Home Alive, like, I mean, everyone deserves to go see a show and hang out with their friends or whatever and not be killed. Um, I you know there was definitely good that came out of it, right? I mean, at the unfortunate loss of a very talented individual, and a wonderful human, but I don't know, man. I mean, I'm not good at doing these sorts of things. Like I'm not good with death at all, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm just not good at with it.
No one
Um,
is.
well, I just I do think though that there is a good that did come out of it, right? Even though it's a horrible tragedy.
No, I think like anything, like if you go to like Bosnia and you see like people rebuilding their homes and you think, oh, at least a good came out of this war. I don't think any good can come of something like that. There's just like there's like there's like a rebuilding or a reassessment or like a necessity to rebuild the houses that were destroyed. Because we need
Hmm.
places. We need nightlife and we want to have some semblance. So I guess it pointed out where people were naive and where the ignorance was and what needed to be done,
Hmm.
and people fortunately stepped up from the ground. No one asked politicians to help, and no one asked any major labels to come and help. Well, actually, that's not true. In the case of the Home Alive compilation, it was on Epic, but I think, um, but I mean, it was a group of people, of outsiders who had moved at the same time that we did. They were our crew that started Home Alive. It was Valerie from 7 Year Bitch and Greta Harley, who had moved from New York, and Valerie and I had moved from Ohio, where we were in school together. And uh, it took, I think, maybe people looking from the outside in and having lived other places and kind of seeing how this could happen again, and how, gosh, how could we miss this? How could we have been so blind to the fact
Hmm.
that people like that there are psychopaths walking among us?
Right.
And I think that was a real difficult learning experience for people, to think that maybe 1 in 100 people is a sociopath.
Hmm.
They could not really care. And if you look at statistics, like I'm a clinical social worker now, and I work with, I've known sociopathic people and people with kids with conduct disorder that will kill an animal or their brother and not think another thing of it.
Right.
And those are, they exist among us, and some people can train themselves to become politicians and CEOs and software executives and so forth and make lots of money. And that's one way to focus your sociopathy. Another way is to hurt people, and those people are a smaller percentage, but they're there. And
Right.
this guy came in from a path of destruction from Florida all the way to Seattle, leaving a trail of tears, in essence, like hurting people and raping people and harassing people, and it was a failure of the system to stop him from
Right.
arriving and haunting and stalking someone and killing. But um, it it
Yes.
was just a confluence of breakdowns that, anyway,
I
my
just lost
phone's
your
ringing up.
video. Okay, there you
Yeah,
go.
I'm gonna. Um, but yeah, it was like it was Home Alive, and the whole reaction and the investigation to find out who killed her was just out of necessity. I
Hmm.
no one had the energy for it or wanted to do it, but they had to, and we had to find out who did it. We didn't want anyone else to be hurt or killed, and I guess we felt a responsibility to Mia to find out who had done that to her,
Hmm.
and to deal with them, and to the city and to the other people and to our friends, that they wouldn't have to be subjected to that kind of fear.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah.
So it's more of necessity, not so much of goodness, I think.
Well, okay. Yeah, totally valid. Totally valid. And when I said goodness, I didn't really. That's not exactly what I meant. I mean, I think it's more of it made people more aware, which I think ultimately is a good thing. Um,
I don't know,
and
man. Sometimes I'd rather be ignorant of shit like that, but
well,
when it's close to you,
that's
it's
true.
like I'd rather go to Disneyland and be happy. But
Right.
it's but I hate Disneyland, so I'm not going.
Right.
We have to deal with what we have.
That's wow. I mean, I I so there are a couple of events in Seattle that so many people are like, well, I was there, right? Like, I mean, the most famous one is probably Nirvana's first show at the Vogue, right? I'm like, yeah, I was there, like, and if you count all the people who were there, it's far exceeds the capacity of the Vogue.
It
So
was like,
yeah, I mean it's obviously bullshit, and likewise Soundgarden's first show at Central, like all these people are like, oh yeah, I was there, okay, yeah, and some of them were like three, at the time the show was on, so obviously they weren't there. Um, but unfortunately, there's the same thing with that night at the Comet. So many people are like, oh, I saw her drinking there that night. Like what? And they make this like almost I don't even know what to call it. It's well, I would call it sociopathic, I would guess, right? Like, oh no, I was there. I was there. I saw blah, what, and like, no,
yeah,
you weren't because I wasn't there, obviously. Um, but I know at that time, the Comet was lucky, on a midweek night to have 30 people in there. You know?
yeah. I was there that night, so
Yeah.
I didn't see those people that you mentioned.
Yeah, no, and there supposedly are like hundreds of them. Um, I I did go in a couple of nights later, and who knows? It could have been 2 days, it could have been 2 weeks. Like I really don't remember. Um,
Yeah,
and because of the way the news cycle worked, it wasn't. I'd heard like through the grapevine, but again, without the internet or whatnot, you're not quite sure what really happened. You hear is like somebody said something happened, blah, whatever. Um, and I just gone in for a beer, and it was dark, man. I mean, it was really, really, really fucking dark in there, and that's when I was like, oh shit, like it really happened, right? Because again, there wasn't access to instant news or whatnot. Um, and yeah, it was really, really, really fucking dark, and I remember thinking, um, eh, and this is like obviously I didn't know Mia, um, but I remember just thinking, wow, like I mean, it's real. Like I mean, this horrible thing is actually real.
well, I don't think that you probably did know her. I mean, if you'd seen us play 4 or 5 times, then you knew. you knew the best of her. You knew what she presented on stage was who she was, and so you did know. In essence, I mean, she would have, I'm sure, been happy to know you as well. But it's like, I think that people are super lucky if they did get to see her perform, because as much as we wanted to play more every day, we would play live and we toured as much as we could. We never got to play as much as we wanted to, and I think we probably get band now. I saw X play a couple, I guess it was 2 Christmases ago. The Continental, what's it called? That's a club in San Francisco that's holds about 2,000 people, and it was packed, and they were so awesome. They were so great, and you could just tell that they knew each other so well, and no one had died in their band, and I was just so impressed and blown away by that they could still be a band 30 years later and still tear it up like they did. And I was just like, I was so elated, and it made me so happy to see that band play. But I think we would have been real similar. We could have opened that show, I think, and it would have been even better. And I went back and told them that after the show.
Yeah, they are an incredible band, and still are. Granted, Exene has her political issues, but other than that, they're still a great band. But she was always a little bit off, so it's not a huge surprise there. That's kind of the next question I was going to ask is, like, where would you see yourself, assuming that horrible event didn't happen, which I realize is a huge assumption, like an enormous assumption.
Well, I think about it, because I have to, and I would, like I said, I think we'd be playing. I think I would probably want to be playing more than those guys, because they seem to be, like, at this point, a little less enthusiastic about playing live. But I think that had we maintained, I think if we'd maintained, if Mia were alive, we'd still be playing. I mean, I think she loved playing live, and I mean, we all did. But Matt now has a family, and who knows what Andy and I would be doing had she not died. So I think we'd still be recording and playing. We'd be on our 10th album and going back to the way we sounded on our first album by now, I think.
So that's really interesting, because I just went back, actually a couple weeks before we first started talking, went back and I do this every couple of years. Well, I go back and listen to bands that I listened to, when I was younger. And man, I gotta say that your drumming on Second Skin is fucking monster. Like, I listen to that over and over and over again. Like, it's such a phenomenal, just like the energy is just, phenomenal.
Yeah, we had a lot of energy. I mean, it was like we saved it all up for being on stage, and that's when we blew up. And I think that recording, I mean, we did that early in our career. We recorded Second Skin and another song with our friend Scott Benson in 91 or something, or 90. And it was our first single on Broken Records, because we couldn't get any interest in Seattle to put out our music. Like, everyone seemed to be starting a label, but no one was interested in us. So we gravitated to San Francisco and played there a lot. And that's where the label said, "Hey, I'd love to put out a single." And we're like, "Sure, here we go." And that was Second Skin.
It's an incredible song, and it's one of those songs that, like, it'd been, several years since I had heard it. And it actually randomly came up on a playlist about 2 months ago, right, on one of my Spotify playlists. And it was like, holy shit. And it was like literally being, like, sucked back into in a moment in time, right? Like, I remembered hearing that song, being done live, which is rare. I mean, I've seen a lot of bands, and it was like instantly. And I remember being at the off ramp. Like, I can't tell you when it was. I can just tell you I remember being there, and I remember hearing the song.
The funny thing about the song is, this is the secret that no one knows, so don't tell anyone. But,
sure. No. You're not being recorded or anything, so don't worry about that.
It's just between you and me and them. But that song, we recorded the song, and when he mixed it down, he forgot to pan anything, and he left it all mono. So that single was pressed in mono. And when you listen to a song in mono, it comes out of the speakers like full blast. Like if you listen to AM radio back in the day, before we were born, there was AM radio, and you would listen to those like by Sweet or Joe Walsh or the whatever, and it would sound like really big because it would just be one speaker like pushing out the sound that would hit you really strong. And that is why it sounds so powerful. It's because it was accidentally recorded in mono.
I love it. I love it.
And it sounds loud, right? Like powerful and loud and in your face. And it's mono.
It's insane. I know that's really interesting.
I thought so.
So what did they do? Did they like split it out into two channels when they eventually, or I mean, like?
No, I think the single. I mean, the album had been remastered by Jack and Dino and so forth. And I'm sure it's more panned in a stereo mix, but like that in that case, it's just one channel of music. You know,
that's incredible, man. I love stories like that. You know?
Yeah.
One of my this is such a cutie. Totally unrelated, but I don't even know why I'm thinking of this, but it's one of those like studio fuck up sort of stories, right? And it involves a hair metal band, so bear with me. One of my favorite stories along those lines is Quiet Riot when they were told that they had to do Come On Feel the Noise, right? And they were like, fuck no, we don't want to do this. This sucks. Like, what the record label was like, yeah, no, you have to do it. So they did. Again, the story might be apocryphal, but it's been confirmed by at least two of the members before they died, that they went in and said, we're going to do the shittiest job we possibly can. We're going to make this the worst song we've ever recorded. And so they go in and they did, at least in their minds. They're like, we're going to do this so fucking bad that the record label will say no. And what happened is they took the first cut, literally the first cut of the track, and that became the song that sold, 35 million copies or whatever the fuck it was, right?
Uh-huh.
So I love shit like that. It's like where somebody fucks up somewhere along the way, but it becomes this like incredible track, it becomes.
It just goes to show you that like there's enough to be said about perfection and being perfect and doing everything exactly the way it should be done. Mm-hmm. But you can't predict like inconsistency and anomaly and improvisation and stuff that just comes out of the creative process that isn't supposed to be there. And for us, it was, we were fallible. We were fallible as human beings. We were fallible as a band. As much as we tried to play tight, we did, but sometimes something would be different. Something would be slightly pitched different, or Mia would say something differently, or I would play something differently. And we decided to allow for that and to allow for imperfection and to see what would happen. And I think that's probably why you remember Second Skin as something that was powerful and you can place yourself there, is because there's everything organic and nothing contrived about it, because we played how we were feeling in the moment, and that was good enough.
Well, I mean, so the Gits to me were always really interesting because it was really hard to put a genre right on what you guys were doing. It wasn't punk, but it kind of was. It was kind of bluesy, but it wasn't bluesy. It was rock, but it maybe was a little more punk. It was kind of very interesting, right? I mean, I personally wouldn't label it in with any single genre, right? I would put it into that weird category of a couple of other bands, who I won't mention because otherwise we'd probably talk about them. That all of them from Seattle, mind you, who kind of had that weird, multiple styles just kind of thrown together that worked really, really, really super well.
Yeah. It was unique in the scene.
Yeah, and I think that the closest band I can come to, even though the sound is not even remotely the same, is like Green River, right? Which is kind of punky, kind of bluesy, kind of rocky, like like this weird combination of sounds. And I think regardless of what ended up becoming of Seattle and whatnot, that is one thing that I think is really, really interesting to me, is that there were these bands that were kind of, they were all over the place. There were definite influences. But if you actually listen to an album Oh, I just did this with my girlfriend actually, right before I got on this podcast. I sent her a copy of Second Skin and said, "Hey, listen to this," and you know, she had no idea how to describe it.
Then she broke
Right?
up with you.
No, not yet. She might after this, but no. I mean, it's. I don't know. Like, I mean, how would you describe the Gits music?
Well, I mean, we didn't have the internet, you guys, back then,
Hmm.
and we didn't have the internet until like I don't know, early mid 2000s, right?
Right.
And so we kind of grew up and came about our sound in a in Ohio. We were in school together in Southwest Ohio, literally 50 miles away from a freeway to take you someplace. So it was like,
Hmm.
oh, the cornfields, and we didn't have televisions, we didn't have MTV, so we
Hmm.
grew up in where we didn't have like pop influences at all. We didn't know what bands were around. Like we brought bands into play there, like the Dead Kennedys, and I saw them. I'm like, oh wow, we should play like that. And then
Hmm.
Can't Prevent Open wanted to play, and so we booked them. It's like, well, that was really weird. They had a fiddle, and they jumped
Right.
around and acted weird, and they were hippies. That's interesting. So like all those elements were like our only influence. So we were influenced by each other's playing. Really, I was
Hmm.
influenced by this influence of the blues, and probably gospel singing and southern soul singing.
Hmm.
And then Andy and Matt had all through high school had gone to shows at CBGB's and seen every hardcore punk band probably that existed in the country at that time
Hmm.
between 83 and 85 or 86. And so they brought this other sort of aspect to it. And I'd been playing drums since I was 10 or 11 and studied jazz. And I was up
Hmm.
in doing different time signatures trying to cover Yes songs and stuff. And I was way over that. I was done pretty much until I
Hmm.
discovered punk rock. Wow, here's a reason to play music. So it was like we were influenced most by each other, I think, that more than any other band. And that's why we didn't feel like we fit in to the Seattle scene. It's everyone sounded like either the Stooges
Hmm.
or fucking some Pearl Jam parallel or
Right.
kind of ballad power ballad band,
Right.
heavy rock, REO Speedwagon or something. That's what
I,
really. And
no. I'm with you on that. I'm with you.
Portland and played with Poison Idea and made friends with them and down in San Francisco and played with Steel Pole Bathtub and Jawbreaker and various bands there and in LA we went down and played with Pop Defect and Paper
Hmm.
Tulips and different bands there that and Beck ended up opening a show for us and we were not influenced by that in any way.
Hmm.
However, we really didn't find much in common with Seattle bands at the time, unless they were bands we lived with, like 7 Year Bitch and the DC Beggars and Big
Hmm.
Brown House, my other band, and played with Hammerbox a lot. And they were also
Hmm.
seemed kind of like outsiders
Oh,
who were
totally.
pushing the boundaries of pop in the way that we were pushing the boundaries of punk rock, I think.
Yeah.
So that, there were
Hammerbox had
everybody.
that. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
Hammerbox had kind of that weird, almost metal but not quite thing.
Mm.
And if I had to compare, like, and please don't be offended when I say this, but if I had to compare two vocalists in Seattle, and we mentioned this a little bit before, Carrie Acri and Mia were very similar, radically different but very similar, and it's that powerful, um, almost bluesy vocal, right, over music that is hard, right?
I think they both were so different, but they respected one another, and I mean, we played probably 20 shows with them, and
Hmm.
because people would lump us together, but they had a very healthy respect for one another's styles and stuff. But there's other singers that were coming around that I thought were more akin to Mia, and Kurt Cobain was one, and the
Hmm.
other is her name now is French Walker. Her name was Eileen back then Walker, and she was in a band
Hmm.
with John Auer from the Posies called
Hmm.
what was her band called? I forget. Um, what was her fucking band? Edit. um,
You know I
what's her
don't
band?
edit anything.
Shit, I forget. I have the single right over there. But she yeah, she actually when Mia died, we actually thought of reforming it, making a new band with her, and talked to her about. I ended up actually working with her a few years ago, finally after many years, and realizing that she had a great voice and a great lyrical sensibility too. Yeah, you know who I mean?
I do, and I can't think of the name either, which is why I'm staying silent.
Yeah,
I could probably look it up, but
I'm going to shout it out in the middle of our conversation in a minute. So
that's fine. That's fine, man. I do that all the time. In fact, don't be surprised if, like afterwards I'll be like, dude, it's
Image.
Image. You're right. IMIJ, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Backward.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I never even thought of that.
Yeah.
I never got that.
The badass band. They were great.
And
one female vocalist.
Yeah. Wow. There was also a kind of similar. What were they called? Anodyne.
Anodyne, I think.
Anodyne. Yeah.
And Belle. I mean, there's Vanessa Veselka, who I later formed a band with. Had a band called. They toured the U.S. probably 5 or 6 times, like all over the place, and had very limited. I mean, I'm sure they sold records on tour, but they never seemed to get any press in Seattle, and they worked. There were very hardworking bands there that were real serious. That just, I think there was a glut. There was just too many of us. Like your song.
Yeah, you just dropped your video. Just dropped, but that's okay. I'll just show my ugly face for a minute.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Awesome. And we're gonna wrap up here very soon, here, Steve. I mean, I appreciate your time.
I'm down to 10%, so let me grab a charger. Okay, I think
Okay. Hey, no worries, man. I'm gonna cut our recording here just for a sec.
Okay, yeah. Ones and zeros.
Ones and zeros. Yeah. I mean, well, that's what I do all day long. So, unfortunately, I'm getting really fucking tired of doing that. By the way.
Edit. I don't understand I don't understand the ones and zeros, and my friends say that's why I am. That's just why I am who I am, because I don't get it.
Yeah, well, that's fine. So, what exactly is it you're doing right now?
God, that's a good question. Right now, from this very moment, I'm building a studio in the house where I live, recording studio in the basement, and we'll be having some people over to record it. I made a record with Tad Doyle at his studio in Renton, south of Seattle, in 2018 or 2019 with a band I was playing in called Wolves in Argyle. It was kind of it was kind of like, people said it sounded like a Seattle band from the 90s, but it had a pretty heavy groove, and with this cat Dave Holmes, who was in a band called the Uzis. That toured a lot, and I think they were based in Tacoma for a while. So we had kind of a band there was some great musicians, and we recorded with Tad, who just made this incredible sounding album. And then COVID hit, and we had tours of the U.S. and Brazil planned. All that went south, but the album still remains. And so I was inspired by how he had converted his garage into a studio. Like, I want to do that, and so he sold me some gear, and he doesn't know it yet, but he's going to be my tech consultant on building the studio.
I love it. Yeah. He's a fantastic human too, just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, great ear for recording. I would recommend anyone like that.
What is it called? I'm sorry. What does he call the studio? Witch Ape or Ape Witch or something like that?
Yeah, Witch Ape, I think.
Yeah. I mean, he's a phenomenal human. He's definitely somebody I want to have on, just because I know he has some incredible stories, right?
Yeah.
The Boise Butcher, and okay, so we weren't going to talk about Seattle music too much, but this one I do want to point out. To me, it cracks me up that some of the most memorable bands from Seattle were not from Seattle at all. Right? Like, the Gits, you weren't from Seattle. Tad was from Boise. Even Nirvana from Aberdeen. I mean, close.
Screaming Trees. Nirvana was Aberdeen, right? And Olympia.
Yeah, and Screaming Trees were Ellensburg.
I got the Fastbacks. That's about it.
Yeah, the Fastbacks. They're a constant, though. I mean, they're still not going to go anywhere.
Island or something.
I'm sorry, one more time.
Soundgarden's Bainbridge Island, right?
Mother Love Bone. I'm sorry, not Mother Love. Well, Malfunction and part of obviously Mother Love Bone were Bainbridge Island.
Hmm.
Soundgarden, I think, were mostly Seattle based. I'm not certain, but I think they were mostly Seattle based. Mudhoney has its origins in Bellevue.
Right.
Like there weren't many Seattle bands or directly from Seattle sort of bands. Um, and actually, one thing that I say all the time is one of my favorite bands from that era is The Fluid, right? And they were
They're
from
from
Denver. They're
Denver.
from Denver, yeah.
Yeah, the Super Suckers from Albuquerque,
Tucson, yeah.
Tucson.
Tucson, yeah.
Yeah,
Actually,
you can't really find one. You can't really. It's hard to find ones from Seattle. Seattle should appreciate other places more.
they should. They should.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And it's funny now that we started that topic, I'm like, okay, I can't think of a single just purely Seattle band at all. I know they exist, but I can't think of one to save my life.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, even Pearl
The
Jam.
Sex Pistols.
What's that?
Sex Pistols. The
Did you say?
Clash. No, yeah, never mind. Aren't they from?
um, well, I mean, we could actually reverse that and say that technically Guns N' Roses are from Seattle because of Duff McKagan, right?
Right. But
So yeah, I mean, if you want to, if you go one way, you can go the other way. So why not? Um, so I mean, you're still doing music and stuff, and I want to talk just briefly about that. Um, Actually, you can talk as long as you want about it. I'm just going to ask one brief question about it. How's that?
okay.
Um, so at some point you moved away from Seattle, and while still doing music, you became a social worker,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Um, yeah. So let's just briefly talk about that. I mean, like what made you get into that? Like what was the impetus to
Well, I wanted to be a witness advocate for people who had suffered,
Mhm.
uh, violent crime. And when I went to graduate school at University of Washington School of Social Work, and was doing my internship at the public defenders when the DA discovered Mesquia was being held in Florida, and he was going to be brought back
Wow.
to to be defended by the public defender where I was working. So that was very ironic. I had a badge to get into the jail where he was being held. I could have gone and had a nice chat with him, but
Wow.
yeah, it was a trip. It was very weird. It was serendipitous, I think is the word. And then they transferred me there. The attorney general of the University of Washington, if you didn't know, they do have an attorney general, found
Right.
out about that and then transferred me to the juvenile division of the public defender up on 12th Street. You know, that horrible
Right.
jail up there. I
Yep.
don't think they use it anymore. I hope not. It's gnarly.
That
But
was the East Precinct that was basically firebombed during the BLM protest last year,
good work on
right?
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So um, and after the trial was over in 2004, I moved with my partner then to Oakland
Hmm.
because she had here and her family was from San Francisco, and but it was
Hmm.
just too costly to live there. We both finished school at the same time and moved to Oakland and had
Hmm.
been here ever since, like 16 years. Longer than I lived in Seattle. I've been in the Bay Area now.
Right.
And which do I like better? Seattle, probably.
Really?
Between July and October.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like that 4 or 5 months that was like perfect,
Yeah.
and then the rest of it is like holy shit.
Yeah. Now I
You
don't
know.
recognize it, so it's kind of like a new city anyway.
Oh, it totally is. I moved up to the north end a few years ago, um, and I can't see myself living in Seattle again.
Yeah. It's just
You
not the
know.
same.
No,
God bless
it's all
them.
gone. All the bars are gone. All the everything is gone. You know.
Yeah.
Um, and the few that have reopened are so radically different than what they used to be that it's almost patronizing, to have that name on on the venue. Like it's nothing like it used to be at all.
No, it's not. But it's to Seattle's credit that they've managed to stay in business.
Right.
Rock or places, and that people have like Ben London and who a lot of the other music industry insiders and have kept the politicians on their toes, so that like they've passed laws that are positive to live music and the industry, that money that it brings into the area and so forth. Like when you go to the airport, there's like a giant Pearl Jam video playing, and like, whoa, this is now like Pearl Jam City or something. But I think it's interesting how Seattle has decided to embrace rock and roll. When before it was like you get a $300 fine for putting a poster on a fire pole.
That's right. That's right.
Crazy. And it was.
Were you here during the teen dance ordinance?
Yeah. We were all
okay.
My job was putting up posters for the OK Hotel, so I had to watch out.
Oh man, yeah. it's Mark Cedrin, right? That was his name. Yeah, he was the city attorney for Seattle, and he's the one who started the teen dance. Fucking dickwad. I no idea what happened to him, but
I think he has a podcast.
Probably. But we're all assholes, so
a MAGA podcast.
Yeah, probably. I mean, he's such an asshole. And the thing that kills me is, he came from Brooklyn, right? I mean, like, you would think that he would be
cleaning up crime in New York at that time was Rudy Giuliani. So of course he was, was all about 3 strikes and you're out and stuff like that. Yeah, stop the kid in life,
I made the mistake of living in Manhattan in the late 90s, and it was like, okay, Times Square should not be fucking Disneyland, right? I mean, like, this sucks, there were still a few good bars, like hidden away, if you walked, especially down to like 11th or whatnot, so like, a few blocks off of, Broadway, there were still some decent places, but it was really sad to see, man,
like Seattle now, really, man.
Yeah, I think all major cities are getting that way, like even San Francisco, which I love. Just the last few times I've been there, I'm just like, it makes me a little bit sad. Actually, it makes me a lot sad.
Very few of the places that had music are going to be open after this COVID thing.
Yeah.
And I've heard of at least 4 venues that I played with various bands that are closing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. I personally could see, 30, somewhere between 30 and 50% of all venues and bars being closed, in the next year or two.
Because hopefully there'll be another scene that rises up out of this. And
I think there will be.
COVID scene,
do you have any kids?
Not that I know of.
Not that you know of. Okay, perfect. I have one, and he's almost 20 now, which is really weird. He just recently got into vinyl because I bought him a record player and what I call a punk rock starter kit, right, of tracks or albums, and I mixed in some hip hop because I mean, apparently all the young kids like hip hop, so whatever, I got him some of that. But anyway, the point of that is I do have a little bit of hope because he's really fucking into it, and never had been interested in it at all, and now he's like, every day, he's like throwing on one of the 5 albums that I got him, as part of his starter pack,
Well, it's validating in a way, right? That actually, records do sound powerful and good and more organic and better than MP3. And actually this music is more spontaneous and powerful than something that's canned and a singer over a track, a created MC track or whatever. Like it's there was like, I think it's going to come back when I see bands in Oakland and there's 5 or 6 kids on stage, and like one of them, the guitar player sounds like he's in the Buzzcocks, and the keyboard player is like they're in Rum DMC, and then the drummer is playing like a Latin beat, and it's like, whoa, they're just mixing genres. They don't care.
Right.
They don't have that separation of styles and stuff. It's all mixed. It's all one thing to them because of just the influence, music and sound that they hear every day on the internet and with their friends. But it's like it's going to be interesting, I think, where music goes, live music, especially in the next 10
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
I'm down with it. That's what I'm building a studio. I want to capture, I want to record it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first band I heard like that was Mindless Self-Indulgence, right? Where they just mixed everything. Like they mixed, hip hop and metal and, a little bit of punk and a bunch of different things all together. And I was like, okay. At first I hated it. And then I was like, this is actually really interesting.
You have to be open-minded about these things.
Yeah.
Just because you're getting older doesn't mean you need to be closed-minded.
That's absolutely true. It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Steve, I know we're about to run out of
Yeah.
time here, but I have one last question for you, and it's one that I ask everybody. And
Okay. This is like the acting studio, right?
yeah, this is nah. So nobody likes this question, but I ask it anyway, just because, well, I'm a dick. Um, what is one thing about you that nobody knows, or I'm sorry, very few people would know?
One thing about me that very few people would know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that is an interesting question. I don't think it's a bad question. So I
Nobody
could
likes
plead
it.
the fifth, but I won't. Nobody knows. I'll show you. Wait a second.
Oh,
This
perfect.
is something no one knows. I'm going to show you exactly that I once looked like this.
Oh, I love that. Oh, you were a cute kid. What happened?
I had braces. That was ugly.
Oh,
My lips
man.
bled.
Let me guess. You were
What
probably about
happened?
13,
Oh,
12 or
God.
13?
I think I was 11. That was my first band. We were
That's
playing another one
awesome,
at
man.
church.
I love it. I love it. I had um, Brad Sensel from TKO on about a month ago.
Uh-huh.
I love that sort of music, so I was excited to talk to him, and he was telling about his first gig, which is at a Mormon temple, um, and their guitar player, I think it was a guitar player, I forget the story, but showed up without any shoes on, and one of the elders was like, "Son, where's your shoes? You can't play here without shoes." And the guitarist turned around and said, "They're at home with my morals." Right? And
The
so,
kid, quick.
yeah. So, and I forget if it was the same show or a different show, but the same guy ended up pulling out his dick, like, in the middle of the show. Right. And of
Penis.
course, yeah, yeah. So, like, nobody knows this band
That's
at
not.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just totally just like, pulls it out. And apparently, in Yakima, that was like, the talk of the town for quite some time. People don't
The
normally do
Mormons.
that, especially in a
I
Mormon tabernacle.
thought the
So,
Mormons say quite a lot.
anyway, hey,
Multiple parts. Yeah.
I love all of that, man. We didn't go as deep as I thought we were going to go into some stuff, but that's fine. I like to do these sort of like free form, conversations.
Yeah.
Um, if nothing else, it sets us up for round two at some point in the future. If that
I
makes
would
sense.
appreciate it. I'm writing a book about my life with Mia. I think I mentioned that. Maybe I didn't.
No, you didn't.
But
Please
it's
talk about it.
not done. Yeah. It's like I don't know if I want to bring it up on yet, but
Okay.
I did a Kickstarter campaign a couple of years ago, so I've been at it for a while.
Oh, okay.
It's about finished, and Pat Moriarty, who's a cartoonist,
Mm-hmm.
and you know him in around Seattle, and
Yeah.
who's doing like it's a novel with it was started out being a graphic novel, but it's become a memoir of my
Mm-hmm.
life with Mia with comics throughout.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
If you want, I'm more than happy to link to that in the
Okay.
description. It's totally up to you. Oh,
We'll do it like maybe the next time, next round or something. Oh, you're
okay.
frozen. No, you're.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have any video from you, but you know what,
Yeah.
Steve, that was a lot of fun, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
I enjoyed it.
And
Thanks.
now it just says John's iPhone, which is awesome. Um,
Yeah. My first name. I should have said that.
oh no, that's fine. That's fine. Um, let's wrap this up. I appreciate you so much, man. That was a lot of fun,
I appreciate you too.
and we'll talk to you soon. If you don't mind, just stay on just for 1 second, and
Okay.
we're gonna call this a wrap. Thanks, Steve.